as you're doing that, it's my great pleasure to be standing here next to you. I found Lyn in a TED Talk, and I was so moved by the message of that TED Talk. We were searching for someone who could help us end the symposium on a hopeful note, and her talk was about how, as a seventh grader, fifth grader, middle schooler, fourth grader, she learned about climate change from her elementary school teacher and came away with this really depressing sense of despair. And then it was recess. And I was like, okay, what do we do now? So I invited her, and she gladly accepted. And I should read your official bio instead of just talking about you. Lyn is a climate researcher, writer, and operator. She can explain what that means. Over the last 2 years, she has traveled across the United States to learn about best climate resilience and adaptation practices from local policymakers, entrepreneurs, and community members. Now she's an outspoken advocate of climate optimism and progress-driven solutions. She shares everything she learns through communications projects, from her upcoming documentary to her publication, Parachute Earth, to her TED Talk. Prior to her travels and research through Parachute, Lyn was the Associate Director at the UCLA Center for Healthy Climate Solutions and the Director of Public Health at Helena. She is currently the head of climate and policy at Impulse Labs. And with that, Lyn, end us on a high note.
All right, shall we? Okay, I think that this mic is working, and either way I project. So yeah, I'm Lyn. I am talking about going from doom and gloom to agency and optimism. If you've been in this room today, which most of you have heard some bad things and some bad news. So we're going to talk about some good things just to end on a high note. Okay, so super quick version of this, since Carmen very kindly introduced me. This part is super quick. I'm Lyn. I learned about climate change right around the time that I could tie my shoes. I was late to the shoe tying game, wore a lot of slip-ons. This was 4th grade for me. But all of that is to say that, like I was in my 4th grade class, someone had brought up climate change, asked a question about it. Teacher was like, yeah, the world is ending. And then she was like, recess time. And so we all went off to recess, and it was actually like really jarring and confusing. And for most of my life, I had a pretty complicated relationship with climate change, where every time I thought about it, I felt this like huge wave of guilt and shame and fear. And then I would just try to ignore it. And then I got into my 20s. And that was basically the entire relationship. And I was part of this generation that, I won't tell you my exact age, but my contemporaries started the youth climate movement. And I think it's a famously angry and sad generation when it comes to climate. And I felt a lot of that. So even though I was working in public health at the time, I made the switch. That's when I joined UCLA to start the UCLA Center for Healthy Climate Solutions. And that was really amazing, fulfilling work, but I couldn't shake this feeling of like always being sad. And I realized that it's because I really was looking for somebody to show me like the exciting work that was happening on the ground. And so I started this project that started off as a very selfish sabbatical, more or less, and became what is called Parachute. And instead of describing Parachute, I am just going to tell you a story. In about the span of a year after leaving UCLA, I traveled to 30 cities, and I spoke to the people that were on the ground putting climate resilience and adaptation solutions to work. And it was super dope, and I crashed on couches and, really just made it work. And I went really from feeling a sense of gloom and doom to feeling really high agency and really high optimism. And so I think that the best thing that I can do is just tell you the story of what I saw, just like some of what I saw. I'm not going to tell you everything. It was a lot. And I'm going to introduce you to some of the people that were doing that work. That said, this is not in any way like a full comprehensive, overview of all the climate solutions that are being done across the country. Super biased sample because it was basically what I found when I first Googled any given city. So grain of salt. Okay, so earlier today we had Jonathan Parfrey here. If you are in this space, then you know Climate Resolve because they do such incredible work. But this is the first place that I went because it was near home for me. This is the community of Pacoima in Los Angeles, and in partnership with Climate Resolve and the local community, Pacoima Beautiful, and an industry partner, GAF, they set up one of the country's first reflective pavement pilots. This was super sick because I went around with a little temperature thermometer laser gun thing and pretty consistently saw temperatures that were, around 5 degrees cooler than the non-reflective pavements, though in some studies that temperature differential is up to 15 degrees, and this is in Fahrenheit. But more importantly, I cannot emphasize how much the reflective pavements made the community much more beautiful because there was a lot of color and there was a lot of vibrancy, and this was bringing students and adults alike out to play in the parks and in the green spaces. Okay, next I went to Phoenix and Tempe. While I was in Phoenix, I was actually drawn there because I wanted to learn more about reflective pavements, got to talk to Ryan Stevens there, who is one of their engineers and leads the reflective pavements program. It was amazing, and they are doing a lot of fantastic work. Brand new study out of ASU last year sort of showed some of the progress that's being done there, but not to be redundant, I'm gonna actually focus on another project that I serendipitously came across while in Tempe. And it was this project by a company called Cul-de-sac. And Cul-de-sac is building America's first purpose-built car-free community, which is really, really sick. So here you can actually see the beginnings of their build on their 17-acre site. And what is a little bit weird about this, from the aerial view, you can tell that the buildings aren't really they're not in this perfect grid. They all look kind of wonky. They're all very bright. And that's actually all completely by design. Tempe is extremely hot. The entire time that I was there, it rarely dropped below 112 degrees. I was carrying a little air monitor and thermometer with me. It was really hot, but Cul-de-sac was significantly colder, and now that it's completely built out, continues to be significantly colder. And that's because they built it with the community in mind first. So over a 17-acre plot of land, they are building about 1,000 residences. And you can see here there's all of these narrow corridors that provide shade during the most of the day, except for noon when the sun is straight down. They have really prudent greenery using a native tree called the Palo Verde. It costs less to water the Palo Verde tree for a year than it takes to buy a pack of gum, I found out. So that's pretty cool. And they use desert and light colors to maximize the reflective index of their surfaces. They also used mostly permeable ground. So there's pavers and decomposed granite and all sorts of ground that lets the water get back into the water table, and they capture that. And they use that as part of their irrigation. All right, so we're gonna move on from Tempe, and we're moving on to Baltimore, Maryland. Here you have Yarel Tuck and Kim Cruz. And they are two members of a church called the Still Meadow Community Fellowship in Baltimore. It's sort of near the Westgate neighborhood of Baltimore, which is, I have not even been sort of near the microphone. So this is near the Westgate community of Baltimore. And it's a historically, it's a community of color, historically underinvested, and is also very flood prone. And Still Meadow Community Fellowship, when you are just on the outside of it, looks like most normal churches. I'm not 100% sure, because I am Jewish, what the inside of it actually, how it compares to most churches. But when you kind of dig into the surface a little bit, there's actually a ton going on here that makes Still Meadow one of the country's first and most effective resilience hubs. So in this picture, you can actually see on the left-hand side this shelf. Now, these shelves were filled with all sorts of emergency supplies, from walkie-talkies to cots to rope that is used for water rescues and has actually been used for water rescues in the event of floods. But it's not just emergency supplies that Still Meadow supplies. So they also have water cisterns that hold hundreds of gallons of water. They have a solar system and backup power that, in the event of an emergency, can power the entire, can power the fellowship for 2.5 days. And they hook that up specifically to their most critical systems. So think refrigeration, so that people have clean water and food, and temperature-sensitive medications can be stored there by community members. Now, this is a particularly interesting example of solutions to me, because Kim and Yarel simply made this happen. They willed this resilience hub into existence with a lot of help from their community partners. So they worked really closely with the city of Baltimore, shout out to Aubrey Gurm specifically. And they were just like thick as thieves, right? The city of Baltimore is working with Kim and Yarel. They were applying to all sorts of grant programs, and they partnered with the Maryland Food Bank, and they, worked with the utilities to get their backup power systems up online, and to get, and to get all sorts of programming. So, on the day-to-day, the church actually benefits from a lot of these, longer term investments like the solar. Their monthly electricity bill went from $1,600 a month to $600 a month, which is great, right? On the day-to-day, this is huge. And then in the event of emergencies, they are able to provide for their community. So this is one of the best things that I've ever seen, and a true example of community partnership between government, nonprofit, academics as well that have been studying this, and and a church. And this church, Kim and Yarel, when I asked them, what was the magic to making this happen? They pretty much were like, don't overthink it. The best thing that you can do is show up in the spaces that you're a part of and say, what needs to happen here? And at first they were like, oh, we need a food program. And then they started a food program. Then they were like, oh, we need cots. And then they got cots. When they needed walkie-talkies, and then they needed solar, and then they needed batteries. They just met the needs as they arose. And that designed a resilience hub that wasn't overthought, and that specifically catered to what their neighborhood needed. Okay, so I also went to Miami. I'm not gonna lie, Miami was a little different than I expected, but I just actually want to specifically highlight one part about the climate resilience in Miami, which was that it was incredibly beautiful. I can't say that it was particularly equitable, and I can't say that it was everywhere, but I've actually never seen a place that had shading structures that were as unique and artful, and urban greening that was statuesque. And I think that we have a lot to learn from that in this, from Miami, because I think that one of the things that's tough about climate is it can feel very much like a zero-sum game. So if we have X number of dollars, we have to spend them as efficiently as possible. And maybe that means coming at the cost of doing something really beautiful. Instead of doing 5 beautiful things, we might be able to do 10 less beautiful things. And I think that Miami shows that there are ways to get creative with our greening solutions, our shading solutions, and our other climate solutions, so that we can prioritize beauty, because communities deserve it. And quite frankly, this is what makes climate solutions really palatable and really exciting to folks. Instead of something that is just utilitarian, it's something that they can really, really get jazzed about. All right, Austin, Texas. Famously hot place, and not very famously a home to some of America's most robust district cooling facilities. So Austin Energy is a publicly owned utility based in Austin, Texas, and they run 7 different district cooling facilities across the city. So I visited one that was based, it was built in partnership with Austin City College. And here you have actually the inside of the district cooling facility. This guy, his name is Whitney Moyer, and he helped build this facility. And he actually, here he's showing me the management system that he created to actually, I don't know, do the bits and the bobs of the management. I don't actually know how any of this works. I'm not an engineer. But Whitney is an engineer. He actually was a nuclear engineer before he went on to create the district cooling facility, which I think shows us a lot about how the talent transition goes alongside the climate transition and the energy transition, because there's a role for everybody to play. But Whitney, he built this district cooling facility just so that you have a sense of what it looks like on the outside. This is my friend Anson. She's not super tall. She's a little shorter than me, but still, that storage tank is a lot taller than she is. And this storage tank, it serves a few purposes, but what's important is that its role in the district cooling facility is to provide some resilience, so that if there's extremely high peak demand, they're able to, if there's extremely high peak demand, they're able to cool water ahead of time and then use it in the district cooling facility when it's necessary. It also helps with load shifting. So they are able to use a lot of energy when it's clean and cheap and abundant. So, when the sun is out shining, they are able to use that to cool the water during the day. And then they use that, when you get other types of like peak utilization. And so they're able to load shift for the grid, which helps to prevent power outages. And it also keeps homes cool even in the event of a power outage, which I think is particularly cool. This facility is also designed to have 2 different power sources. So if the power goes out from one of their power sources, they actually still can be up and running. So I don't know. I thought this was a pretty cool one. All right, Minneapolis, Minnesota. When I was in Minneapolis, honestly, I was pretty surprised to find the depth of climate resilience solutions in Minneapolis that I did, simply because Minneapolis is doing okay as far as climate change, right? They are in a more temperate environment as things warm. But there was so much forward thinking that the city government and local nonprofits were doing that, they were leading the charge. So I met with the leadership of a nonprofit called Green Minneapolis, and they worked in partnership with the Minneapolis Parks and Recreation Board and an organization called City Forest Credits to help finance urban greening projects throughout the city, so in the metropolitan area. So they actually in one round of this private public partnership raised $1.3 million from local, I think it was local enterprises, including companies like Target that are headquartered out of Minneapolis, by selling urban forestry carbon credits, the first of their kind in the state and one of the very first in the country. So they sold those carbon credits, which allowed, these companies to say, okay, that goes towards our net zero goals, but it also greens the entire city. So they were able to plant and maintain more than 20,000 trees with this one project. It's also just really important to note that these urban carbon credits were significantly more expensive, about double the price of a typical carbon credit, and they had no issue selling them. And they cited that the reason that they had no issue is because all of these companies, they were local. They saw this as not just an investment in the climate, right? They weren't just buying trees in the Amazon, right? Or in some rural town that was not attached to their company. They were seeing this as an investment in beautifying their community and cleaning up the air for their employees, and it was something that felt personal, and so these companies were willing to pay a premium for that. So I think that there's really something to be said about climate solutions that speak to people's priorities rather than just to climate priorities. Oh, and this is PV Plaza. Green Minneapolis actually helped to restore this. This was kind of an underinvested area, and now it's a beautiful restored fountain. There's all sorts of community gatherings that happen here, concerts in the park, and it creates a lot of social social strength and networking that I think is really important for climate resilience. And Minneapolis also had some really sick infrastructure, green and gray infrastructure along the lake, little green roofs, some activation along the blue space, the green space. Love that. Okay. Final story of what I saw. This is Port Fortune, Louisiana. Port Fortune is part of Lafourche Parish. This is about 2 hours south of New Orleans. So it's on the Gulf of Mexico, famously marshy land/coast. It floods a whole lot there, and you can actually see, the reason I included this photo is you can see that this house is up on about 20-foot stilts, and every building that we passed was like this. So we went to Port Fortune because we heard that there was a lot of really interesting climate adaptation happening there, and I didn't really know what to expect. And if I'm going to be totally honest, I was quite anxious when we arrived, because on the drive down, I'd been going mostly to urban environments and felt pretty at home. And then, we're driving down and we ended up going through some really rural towns, saw, Confederate flags and things that make a young woman on her own not feel super excited about being alone. And then we got there, and it was one of the most life-changing experiences that I've ever had. So this guy, his name is Chet Chasen. He is the director of Port Fortune. He and I sat down for an interview to talk about the work that they're doing at the port. And as soon as we sat down, it became immediately clear that we did not have extremely aligned political views or even like extremely aligned, understandings of what has to happen, like what's causing climate change, what has to happen in response to climate change. And he is one of the people that I probably respect most in this world after that conversation. Because Chet has grown up around, like in Lafourche Parish for, he grew up there, his grandparents grew up there, and he plans to have his grandkids grow up there. He is like a part of that community. He's only left for college, and he came back from college, immediately became the port director, and about a week in or a month in, the Deepwater Horizon spill happened. So he's really experienced firsthand the effects that the oil and gas economy can inflict upon communities, right? He also originally had us, we were originally not going to be doing the interview here, but I insisted upon it. We went and did the interview in the Port Authority building, which was destroyed during the recent hurricane. And it had still been like, it was not restored yet. It uninhabited, under construction. And like, this is as frontline, I think, as a frontline community gets. Like the entire building was destroyed in a hurricane, Deepwater Horizon spill. At the same time, there was this like really intense tension because Port Fortune is responsible for supplying about 16 to 18% of the US's oil and gas. So we have a tension there, right? So Chet and I end up talking for a little while, and he tells me about all of the resilience and adaptation work that they're doing. Because even though we didn't completely agree on everything climate related and everything politics related, we did agree on this, and it was that no matter what, like that community deserved to survive and thrive in the face of climate change, and they were going to take every opportunity that they could, whether that meant economic or infrastructural, to make that a reality. So Chet has overseen the restoration of this port. There are 600 or so oil platforms nearby, but he's also overseen the man-made structural change of the environment. They've dredged and created about 100 acres of marshland specifically for environmental restoration, carbon sequestration, and education and recreation. So there's kids kayaking out there and people fishing, and it's so gorgeous. And at the same time, Chet and I, we were having a discussion about the role that oil and gas plays in the economy. And he said, well, I asked him about offshore wind. He was like, oh my gosh. He was like, I am so excited about offshore wind. I cannot wait for this. I was like, okay, tell me more. He was like, listen, Port Fortune has all of the infrastructure and all of the talent and all of the know-how to thrive and be a leader in offshore wind. Right? So he's telling me about how excited he is. I checked up on this recently, and on January 8th, Port Fortune and Chet Chasen announced that they're going to be the first port in Louisiana to have offshore wind capabilities. So he's delivering on that promise, and he is going to be a leader in offshore wind because there is something to be said about the talent transition and the infrastructure transition and all of these resources that we don't have to abandon in the climate fight, but that we can utilize instead. So, do you think this is going to work? I just wanted to show you what it actually looks like here. So this is the port. You can see that it's like a bustling industrial hub. I'm not the world's best drone pilot, so you're going to just have to deal with me. It's going to pan to the left and take a look at the marshland. We're about to see the 100 or so acres of marshland that they specifically man-made to improve their coastal resilience in the event of further extreme weather events. So yeah, all of that is about 100 acres of man-made marshland, and beyond what you can see here with the camera is about 7,000 mangrove trees that they planted as well. So this is some pretty serious work that they've been doing. All right, you can even see the little boat. Okay. There's also more stuff that's coming down the pipeline that I'm super excited about, or that either I'm excited about or I find really interesting. This is a really controversial and I think therefore interesting project. You've probably heard of it. It's called California Forever, and they are building a new, like mostly, 15-minute city-style community, not too far from here. And at first I was skeptical, but then I talked to the folks that are doing their climate planning, and they are being incredibly thoughtful. And to me, it was an exercise in like suspending disbelief and allowing myself to maybe give people the benefit of the doubt that they're probably actually building something in earnest, and because they want the world to be a better, more climate resilient place. This is a mock-up that they have of the community, which I think is cute. And then I'd be silly not to mention some of the tech that is happening in San Francisco. I think climate tech is a really interesting industry. This is one example. I'm only speaking to this because I literally can. This is a product by Impulse Labs that is battery-powered appliances. So it's all about load shifting and being able to allow like people to electrify their homes, but then not lose power during a power outage, which I think is pretty cool. In the process, I saw like a couple of key features that made solutions work pretty much every time. The first one was just solutions that expanded the pie were really popular with communities. So rather than having us, like all debate, oh, okay, does this community get this or does this community get that? How do we design solutions that are greater than the sum of their parts? Solutions inherently involve risk, right? You have to jump out of the plane at some point and just assume that your parachute is going to deploy. And I think that like a lot of the folks that I talked to had expressed some nervousness when they were starting to deploy their solutions. But we have to eventually take the leap, and we can do all of the risk assessments and all of the mitigation strategies and everything. At some point, you just gotta send it. This is a little bit more nuanced, but the most effective solutions I saw treated time as a really scarce input and not a scarce output, right? So what I mean by that is being really, really diligent and trying to get out the door as fast as possible, obviously with prudence and like care and thoughtfulness, but really, treating time as of the essence, but not treating the goal of solutions as just simply buying us another year against climate change, right? It's not about just buying time. And then finally, solutions that walk the walk instead of talking the talk. Now, this is I think really important. There's a lot of big stances being made by all sorts of entities, and we have to go beyond making promises, and we have to start just putting shovels into the ground if we're going to make a difference. This is the one thing that I will say was tough about this process. Before I traveled, I decided I was going to read the resilience plans of the big cities that I was going to. I read through 22 resilience plans in 22 cities. It was 2,800 pages, and I looked through more than 1,000 actions of all of those resilience plans. And at the end of it, I did not feel hopeful. I felt mostly overwhelmed. I was really glad that those documents existed, but I feel like the way to get people to act is not by telling them through things, like documents and PDFs where like real hope can be buried, but by showing them through action. Working in climate can be hard. I think, especially for the people in this room, I think if you have, been listening today, then maybe today is a hard day after listening to some bad stuff. But we know what works. One of the things that really hit home for me was there was a lot of these solutions were innovative, but they weren't going to the moon. Like they weren't rocket science. We know how to respond to climate change. And now we also know how, not just what works, but how to do it. And that's that action orientation. Ooh. Okay, this is how it works. Now it's time to get to work. And this is one of my favorite quotes. Imperfect action is better than perfect inaction. And I'll just leave you with this one illustration by Oliver Jeffers for Time magazine. It says, here's where things are. It's a picture of Earth, and it says all of the problems pointing to Earth, and it says also all of the solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn, for giving us all those examples of what can be done. I especially like to just do it. So we have maybe 3 minutes for questions. Are there any from folks in the room? Online?
Yes, you're good.
We have one question. One question online for you. About California Forever. It seems as if this echoes what happened in the Owens Valley. land grabs, water grabs, huge investments. Do you really think climate solutions are involved, or could it just be lip service?
So I actually don't know much about Owens Valley, so like, I guess caveat there. I can't make the comparison directly. What I can say is I actually interviewed the California Forever Sustainability and Infrastructure Manager, and I was really thoroughly impressed. I think that there is an earnest effort to create a community that is accessible to everybody, that is affordable, and that is net positive in terms of resources for the state. I am literally in no way affiliated with them. I did an interview with them, and that was my honest and genuine takeaway. How that's going to play out over the next several years, we'll have to see. But I think part of all of this is an exercise. I know that this is hard to say, and maybe it's not always the right thing to say, but I do think that climate solutions have to be an exercise in trust and benefit of the doubt, and but that with prudent monitoring, and I think that California Forever is a good opportunity for that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Well, it's been quite a day. We have a final slide. As we mentioned earlier, as Dr. Zeiss mentioned earlier, as the information on our webpage about this symposium mentioned earlier, this symposium is a kickoff. It launches a series of webinars, 6 of them, that we in OEHHA are co-convening with state agency partners who have responsibilities for the topic. I'm not going to read off the slide. I'd like to get you out of this room quickly, but we will have this information on our website. If you would like to be contacted, please subscribe to our listserv. And I do want to give a huge thank you to all of the folks whose hard work made today possible. First of all, the Climate Indicator team, Tamara, Bennett, Emma, and online, Lori Montserrat. And in addition to that, I would like to thank OEHHA's Executive Office for their support throughout the process and advice and counsel ideas. I also would like to acknowledge the fact that I am so indebted to many of you in the different state departments and agencies whose brains I picked for ideas. Thank you for saying yes when I said, do you have 30 minutes for a quick chat? I want to run an idea by you and get your thoughts. So I'm looking at Kim, one of them, Dan Wu's group, Dan Wu, Linda Helland. I know I'm going to miss people. Whitney Albright, who was here earlier from Fish and Wildlife, Sloan Viola from the Office of Planning and Research, Annie Huang from ARB, Chris Keithy from CAL FIRE, Chris Hien from the State Water Resources Control Board, our partners at the Department of Water Resources, Mike Anderson, who was here, along with Alyssa Lynn and Evan, and within OEHHA, Rupa Basu and Amal. And finally, UC Davis, Tessa Hill gave me some great advice in putting the symposium together. And so with that, thank you all for your attention, and we hope to see you virtually.